Welcome to the second month of the Gardens Block of the Month. This month we're going to add on to our garden pond block that we made in January or month 1, depending on when you joined us. We are going to add some squares to all 4 sides of the block plus a border. After the border is added, we are going to add the applique, and the applique is going to be made with your color of choice. If you're doing the ombre, it's the mustard color. If you're using something else, you'll need a gradient of 4 colors, and you'll need a small selection or a small amount of each. Fat eighth is probably plenty to a fat quarter. If you're using an ombre, definitely a fat quarter of ombre. But if you're using your own colors, just scraps or a fat eighth will be enough. So the ombre that I'm using is the mustard, and you can see, like the lagoon, it graduates from dark to light at the center, and then that way I can really get a nice selection of colors, a nice range from within one color. Take a peek here. You can see how I have the appliques in the center, and they are the lighter colors, and then on the outside edges I have various other applique colors. They graduate from light in the center to the darkest out in these corners here. You can really place the colors in any way you prefer. This was the balance and the kind of look that I really liked for my original quilts. But again, this is also your interpretation. So if you want to change the colors up and make it really fit your personality, feel free. We're going to use an applique technique. It's kind of a signature for my mom, Sharon Chamber. It is my absolute favorite applique technique for turned edge applique. If you prefer raw edge, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm not making a video on raw edge applique, but you can use any raw edge method that you prefer. For this turned edge applique technique, we are going to use a foundation paper that actually stays in, and then with quilting time use, it gets really soft. That way, with the foundation, you don't get shadowing. You also get some stability with it, and it gives a little bit more loft and lift to your quilt as well. And I'm going to walk you through all of the instructions for that. To get started, though, we are going to add squares to the outside of our blocks plus this border here. When I teach this, I get asked most often, can't I just make a strip of fabric to go around the edge and then put the applique on it? Technically, yes, but I find the applique goes on so much more easily. It's much more accurate placement when we have the squares on here. If you want to make your own judgment call and do a strip of fabric and figure those measurements for yourself, you're more than welcome to, but I don't provide that information. So that'll be a little bit of quilt math for you. But I think you'll find, as I did when I was making the original, putting the applique on in this manner with the blocks instead of a strip, it works really nicely, especially if you're just beginning. So let's go ahead and jump right in to what you're going to need this month to do all these wonderful things. So first, you'll need your background fabric. We're going to cut some squares that will go around the edges here. So we're going to add them all the way around. They will intersect and nest with your previous seams, which will work really, really nicely for you. In order to get your squares cut, you'll need your rotary ruler and your rotary cutter. Now, last month I said this is my favorite cutter, and I failed to show you why. So the reason why I love this cutter, besides the fact that it's purple, which is my favorite color, and it's Olfa, which is a great brand, is the blade changing mechanism. So on the back, it has this little what would you call it? A blade changer tab. Anyway, I'm sure it has a technical name. So you pull down on it, and it pops, and then you lift it off and you can change your blade. You can also clean it out. Look, mine really needs some cleaning. So I can clean it out really quick. So after I've cleaned it out, that will probably work a lot better. So I'll pop it back on. So I don't have to worry about losing bolts and screws and the little washers that go inside. It's just so easy to change the blades. Just a little quick plug for that that guy, and of course I do have it in my shop. But you can, if I'm not easy for you to shop from, you can find them at quite a lot of local stores as well. So that's what you'll need to get started, plus some spray starch to prepare your fabrics. We are going to starch that to get a nice accurate cut, and then we will go ahead and get those pieced on. So in addition, after we've gotten these pieced on, we're going to jump into the applique. So let's take a look at the cover page for this month's pattern. I show you here the layout for your piece, the garden pond block, which you're adding onto, and then the appliques and the colors you'll need for the appliques. Also let you know how many of each you're going to need. At the end of the pattern is a template page for your garden pond templates for the appliques. You can use as few or as many of these. I'll walk you through how these are used and how to get the best use out of them. In addition to those things, you'll need the applique foundation. If you purchased the fabric kit from me, then you've received a yard of this, which you'll use. If not, I have it available in my store. It's you can buy it by the yard, as little or as much as you need. You'll also need a school glue stick. I use the Elmer's washable. That is purple to start with. That's my favorite. You'll also need the Elmer's washable school glue with the fine tip that we used last month. If you have it, you'll need a permanent fabric glue. This is just for reinforcing the tips of our applique pieces. And for sewing, I recommend and use the Sulky Invisible Monofilament. It is clear. There is a smoke as well, so if you're doing a really dark applique piece or dark applique fabric, then the smoke is available. This is available in my store. It's also in the thread set that I showed in the first videos. I do use this in the bobbin. If you don't want to use it in the bobbin, if you know your machine just does not like monofilaments in the bobbin, I would recommend a similar weight polyester thread. It's really important to also use polyester, because this is polyester, in your bobbin. If you use a cotton and then a polyester on top, the threads will fight each other and you'll get nothing but trouble. So a polyester thread, 50 weight to 60 weight is going to be the way to go for that. You'll also need a good pair of scissors. Shears for this just aren't the right tool for the right job. You really need something with a nice short blunt blade. I talked about these scissors in the last video, and I'll give you a link for them again. You'll also need a stapler, so get that handy, and all of these items will be used when we get into the applique portion of the pattern. To start with, we're going to use the background fabric to make our squares that we're going to add around the quilt block and your border. So we'll start with that first. So to start with, we're going to need to prep our fabrics and just give your fabric, your background fabric, a light spraying of starch. Spray it on one side, let it settle in, and then flip it over, and then you will prevent any starch from getting onto your iron, from causing flakes. This is a really great strategy for pressing. I know pressing can seem like a daunting task. Really, the only thing I press is fabric for quilts. Fortunately, my husband wears scrubs to work every day, so I don't have to press his clothes, or he doesn't ask me to. I'd probably just set out the iron for him and say, it's right over there, there's an ironing board and everything. But pressing this way will help stabilize the grains of your fabric, which is really important for cutting and getting accurate cuts. When your grains are stable, your going to get less shifting, and everything's going to end up being the size that you want it to be. So again, just give it a light spray. And I do not starch everything before I get started. I kind of starch what I need when I need it. That's really daunting to me, is to feel like I have to starch every piece of fabric before I start a quilt project. I like to do it in chunks. It seems much more manageable to me, and then I don't end up with a bunch of fabric that's starched and pressed that I don't want. For example, with our applique fabric, this does not need to be starched. I actually am going to recommend you don't starch it at all, because starched fabric's harder to turn the edges on. So for our background fabric, we do want it starched. And once it's all starched and you can do as much as you will need, then we're going to give it, cut it up to be used. Before we jump into making our cuts, I want to talk really quick about borders. We are going to be cutting some narrow borders that are only 1.5 inches wide. And anytime you cut a border, it's always recommended that you cut it on the length of the fabric. So the length being here along the parallel to the selvage. So give yourself enough of your background fabric in length along the selvage to cut your borders rather than cutting them the width of the fabric. The reason for that is stabilization. When you have your fabric, if you give it a stretch along the selvage, you are going to have less stretch than when you stretch it along the width. So that is going to help give you a more stable border that doesn't shift or get wobbly or stretch when you're piecing it in your machine and end up longer at the one end than you wanted it to be. That is something I really highly recommend giving it a try. And I do understand that sometimes it'll feel like you're being wasteful with fabric to do that. So I leave it up to you. With this specific size of the border, it's pretty small, so you're not going to waste fabric. And we're right at the beginning of this whole process, so we're just digging into your background fabrics, and you have plenty, I promise. So I'm ready to cut out my squares, and these squares you can easily cut multiple layers of fabric. You're just cutting a simple square. Measurement is in the pattern, and you're going to need 20 total. And I'm just on a small mat here, so normally when I'm not filming a video, I have a really large mat, and I could easily cut this full length here. But when I don't, fold it in half, and this also shows that you can cut through multiple layers. We're going to true up one side. So I'm right-handed, I'm going to true up the right-hand side. So when I true up the one side and it's folded, I am going to keep my fold toward me, and I'm going to align the fold through one line of measurement on my ruler. And then I'm going to cut off whatever is extra out here. Keeping this lined up on the fold will help make sure that when it's unfolded, you don't have a V coming through the middle. You know what I'm talking about. So this will help keep it nice and straight. I'm going to scoot it over, give myself some wiggle room over here. And after I do that, I'm going to flip it over and cut it from the left to the right. That trued up edge is going to be aligned at the cutting measurement that I need. Hold the ruler in place. Make sure that down here my fold is also aligned. If it isn't for some reason, because we're cutting squares, it will all be trimmed off. This isn't a border piece. So after that, we'll true up this edge over here, aligning this trimmed edge or trued edge and that trued edge in between the same width of measurement. So it's 3.5 inches, so it's 1, 2, 3.5 inches. Doesn't matter what the numbers are as long as the measurement amount is correct. True that up, flip it around again. Now if you have some sort of die cutter or something with 3.5 inch squares and you want to use it for this, go for it. But I'm just going the old school way. So there's 2, and there's 3. Let's see how much is left here. Oh, that's negligible. There's not enough left to do with that, so that's scrap. I'll go ahead and cut out the rest the same way. So let me do one more just to walk you through it. So I'm lining that trued up edge, the trimmed edge, at the 3.5 again, and then cut straight through. Get another trued up edge between the 2 measurements, or the beginning and ending measurements of 3.5 inches. And then flip that on around, and then again cut the same. You could also go this way if I really wanted to. If visually that helps you all do that. So all right, now I have 8, so I have got 12 more to go, and I'll cut the rest of those, and then we'll go ahead and cut that border too. All 20 of the squares that I need to go around the garden pond block are cut and ready to sew together. So what I'm going to suggest is first sew together 2 rows of 4 that will go, one will kind of go here at the top and the other one will go here at the bottom, and then we'll add on the sides. Piecing the squares on in that way will get the squares put in just the right positions that we need them to be, and we'll be able to press the seams and the directions that they need to go in order to get everything to nest and spin like these were done. So to get started, I'm going to take 4 of these, and we're going to glue baste these together in a row just like we did before, and then I'll do a second row of 4 as well. Just like I did before, I'll start with drawing a line of glue, and I'm kind of going to avoid these corners just so there's less glue for me to have to pull apart and release when I go to spin the seams. And then put those together, matching up all the sides. Take your iron and heat set that, and then fold it on over. Repeat the same process, and then line those up. Get the edges all aligned as well, and heat set, and then we'll do the same thing for the next one. Okay, and heat set that. And now this is ready to sew. I'll repeat that for another row of 4, and we'll also do 2 rows of 6. So that will give me enough for all 4 sides, and then we will be able to sew those rows onto each side of the garden pond block. After that, we will sew on our borders before we do the applique. So just to go through this real quick, when I sew these together, I'm going to start at a 1/4 inch down, just like I did on the garden pond, and stop at a 1/4 inch from the bottom. And I'll do that for each of the seams. And then once those are sewn, we'll come back and we'll press them in the correct directions and then join those seams together. So each of the rows of blocks are sewn along each seam, and you can see there how I started at the 1/4 inch and stopped. And now we'll go ahead and set the seams and press them in the directions they need to go in order to align with the original garden pond block. Really does not matter which side you start putting this together on. If it's important to you to really have the top going first, then you know, by all means work in that direction. but they're all going to join to all four sides. So it really doesn't matter where you start or stop. Just is important which directions we have the seams pressed in. So if I'm starting with this side first and this row, I have this seam here I can feel is going to the left. From the front, it's going to the left. So this seam will need to go to the right, and then the next one will go to the left, and then the next one will go to the right, and then it'll nest and match this one really well. And then the same will go for the bottom. We will press the seams for the second row to go along with the bottom, and the bottom, this seam is going to the right, so this one will go to the left, and then right, and then that one to the left. So we'll go ahead and do those seams first. We'll set them. So again, it just prevents any rippling along the seam line, and it locks in the stitches. And this seam is, this one here is going to go to the right. So I'm right-handed. It's easier for me to go this way, so I'm just flipping it around. And then that one's going to go to the left, and then to the right. Okay. And then we'll make sure that I have this aligned in the right way, because I was kind of flipping it back and forth when I was pressing the seams. So, yep, there we go. That's all those seams are going to align in the correct way. So that one will heat set to that. Let's press this one, bottom one, just to make sure it's all going in the right direction. So let's make sure this one's going this way. Does make a difference because there's only 3 seams here. So if you press it wrong, you have to kind of work it out and repress it. And then that one's going to go that way. Okay, and try and keep these straight. Generally like to start from the center. Make sure that center seam nests, and then go to the next seams. Make sure those nest, and then go out to the edges. Make sure that everything aligns up at the top. Okay, and then heat set it. Now on the linen, I do give it a extra few seconds, where just regular fabric, it sets really fast, so you don't need to do that as much. But you know, set it as much as you need to make yourself feel and be confident that it's secure. Okay, and then glue again. Again, you just need that fine line. Okay. And then from the center out on this one, nesting them. Now, if the seams don't match, if you start with the center and you get to this seam here and they don't quite match, give it just a gentle stretch, not much. You may have gotten a fold on the seam line there on the front side, or just done your seam allowance just a little bit bigger. Now, if it's off a lot, I would split the difference and offset both of these seams just a smidge, rather than have this one match perfectly and this one be off by a lot. I feel like that gives a better look. If you are very particular and you want to fix it, you could always re-sew the seams, but really sometimes just splitting the difference between 2 that might be off a little bit is better than having it be mismatched or offset a lot on one side and none on the other. So those are all matched. So next I'll sew the seam here and the seam here, also starting and stopping at the 1/4 inch, so that these seams will nest and spin, and then we'll join those last 2 rows of squares. They're all sewn up. Let's go ahead and press it out just like we've done before. Set the seam, it really helps. And then from the back, I'm going to just kind of open up those seams and see how easily that one opened up since I kind of skipped the glue right at the 1/4 inch portion. And then we'll do this one and the next one. Oh, that one had a little bit more glue, but I'll just gently pull that apart. And then from the back, I'm going to take my iron and kind of push that down. And it helps, it really does help a lot with the pressing on the front side. Okay, and then from the front, I'll just go ahead and press each of the other seams in the direction they are meant to go. So this one is coming toward my right. This one's going up the other direction. Remember that pinwheel motion? This one's going to go that way, and then this one's going to go that way, and then they kind of alternate. All right. Use your fingers, use tools if you need to. It's going to be something that just kind of comes much more naturally the more practice you give it. So that side is done. See there? That looks really good. I'm happy with that. It's sure looking nice though. So set the seam here. Open them up. Give that a little press. Gotta be really gentle with this linen. Okay, and then same as before, kind of press these in the opposite directions. Now we are ready to add the row up here at the top. Before you do, just double check on yours that things are looking kind of straight. You know, double check that things aren't shifting and going off into crooked directions, because this is a lot of squares. And if need be, give it a starching to kind of get things to lay a little flatter. Like right there, it's feeling a little stretched out, so I'm just going to give it a little. All right, now I'm ready to press the row of 6 that will go right along that side. So let's do that really quick. This one starts over here on the left with going to the right, and this one actually, this end goes to the right as well. So we'll just set these seams super quick. Oops, that one got a crease. Okay. And from here, kind of, this one's going to the right, so then I'm going to start over here with the left. It really doesn't matter which side you start on. You'll kind of get the hang of what works best for you. And if you have to switch it back and forth like I do, just because of your handedness, then do what works for you. Just make sure you let that heat go through and penetrate. And don't stretch it too much. Give it, you know, if you need to give it a little gentle gentle maneuvering, do that, but don't stretch it or you'll just cause other issues that can lead to headaches. All right, that one looks pretty good. So now it's ready to glue baste onto this side. Do that all the way across. And then I'm going to start kind of with that middle seam like I did before, make sure it nests, and then follow up with the remaining seams all the way to the edge. And you can see here all the way to the edge, these all line up pretty darn nice all the way around. But these are my focus. If I'm off a little bit here, it's just going to end up in the seam allowance later anyway. I'd rather these match and this be off a smidge than try and get my edges to match and then my seam intersections be offset. So sometimes on these longer seams, if you heat set in the middle and then kind of adjust to the ends, it'll help a lot with managing the length. All right, it is looking great. I'm sure yours is looking really nice too. Be sure to keep posting pictures and share your progress on social media, Facebook, Instagram. See, I was talking and I messed this one up, so I'm just going to re-glue it. There, that's better. All right, this side is ready to sew. I'll do the same exact thing for that bottom side, pressing the other row and getting it to match up, and then we will be ready to press out these this one long seam and join our borders. The final two seams joining the little blocks to Garden Pond are sewn, so we'll just set those little guys, and then just like we did before, just kind of open up those seams on the back and get everything going in the direction it needs to go. Now, you've been watching me do this now for a couple of videos, and if you've watched any of my older videos, you've watched me do this a lot. And you might wonder, well, why doesn't she just press them open? Why not press them open? Cristy should just do that. Well, here is why. It's a big deal. I do not press seams open except for very specific reasons. And the reasons I don't press open are, number one, strength. Your quilt or anything you sew together is only as strong as your thread if you're pressing your seams open. So if this is open all the way and then you quilt it, especially quilt it very densely, your seams are under a lot of stress and then the threads can pop. And then you'll have holes and you'll have all sorts of issues. And the second reason is for quilting. When your seams are pressed open, you can't stitch in the ditch. So if that is something you like to do and you like the look of, then you will actually compromise your seams if you stitch in the ditch with your seams open. So in addition to it making your seams stronger and it being easier to quilt, whether you quilt it or you have somebody quilt your quilt, they also give your quilt a really nice look from the front. It helps to keep your blocks straighter as well, given the extra attention to pressing your seams so that the intersections are flatter and stronger, and your seams are stronger, will help your quilts last much longer and be something that can be loved for years and years and years to come. All right, so let's finish pressing all of these seams and get those borders joined. So when we are going to work on those borders, we'll press the fabric and get it all ready to join, to cut and join on. Okay, let's just make sure it all looks good. Right, the other side. So what I'm doing with my fingers here is kind of making sure as I go down the seam that the seams are just going the direction I want them to. It's just another strategy. You'll kind of use some of mine, you'll find your own, and kind of pick and choose what works best for you. All right, so this one is done. Now that all of the squares are added to the edges, we'll go get those borders added on.